the protrusions in front, these are known as the ASIS bones. This is a short term for a mouthful, the anterior superior iliac spine. And I'll break that down for you. Anterior, simply meaning the front of our bodies. Anterior, we're all familiar with the front, anterior view. So this is the front of the body. Anterior superior. Superior just meaning that it's above this spot. It's above a lower point that we don't have to worry about right now. So superior is higher up from this point. Iliac, that's this bone. The ilium, this whole area is known as the ilium of our hip, which actually goes a lot higher on our bodies than we might imagine. And this is the spine of the hip. So ASIS bone. We're going to be talking about that a lot during the class. Then we have this spot, the greater trochanter. If you were to knock right there real hard on the outer edge of your body, you probably assume that it's your hip. But this spot right here is actually the thigh bone. So some people can feel it on their bodies, some people cannot, but right there is a real hard attachment point for many, many tendons and muscles. Again, it's called the greater trochanter. Greater trochanter as opposed to the lesser trochanter. If you were to dive on a diagonal line from here to here, you would find the lesser trochanter, the tiny knob inside of the thigh. Okay? Then in the back of our body, if I turn my friend around here, we can see the sacrum. The sacrum is also often mistaken for the hip. It's so tightly wedged into the hip that it can feel just like the hip, but there's actually a joint space here. There's a little opening, as tiny as that might be, where ligaments attach the sacrum to the hip. I defined a tendon as something that attaches muscle to bone. A ligament attaches bone to bone. Once again, a ligament will attach bone to another bone. So we have ligaments also all over our body, generally between every single joint. Right here we have a host of ligaments that stabilize this sacrum right here between the hip bowl. And we call that the sacroiliac joint, SI joint for short. So here's the ilium, and here's the sacrum, sacroiliac joint. Ligaments are very similar to tendons. Ligaments are wiry, very fibrous, a little more brittle than tendons generally because they're built for stability. They're engineered so that our joints don't slip out of place. Now, let's look at the spine itself briefly. You may or may not be familiar with the different areas of the spine. I'll go over it very quickly. We have the lumbar region, known as the lower back. That's everything beneath the ribs and above the hips and sacrum. So lower than the ribs and above the hips, we have 5 lumbar vertebrae. These are the largest of the skeletal vertebrae. Then we have the middle back, known as the thoracic region. The thoracic region goes with the rib cage. So we have the 12 thoracic vertebrae. That's the middle spine. Lastly, we have the neck, the cervical vertebrae. The cervical vertebrae is the smallest vertebrae. Because they're so small, they're also very mobile. This is the most flexible part of our spine. As with anything that is so mobile and flexible, we have good and bad points about that. We have a lot of movement, but we also can more easily strain it. With hypermobility, in other words, a lot of flexibility, a lot of movement, there's the possibility of injury. And so neck injury is definitely a big problem with these small joints at the cervical vertebrae. So we have 7 vertebrae here, 12 here, combining with the ribs, and 5 lumbar vertebrae at the lower back. Another thing you might notice, which is a very important feature when it comes to posture and lifelong health, I can't overstate this, is the curvatures of the spine. So if we add the sacrum to the equation, which is fairly important to do, because starting from the tailbone at the sacrum, the tailbone also known as the coccyx bone, all the way up to the end of our cervical neck area, we have a snake-like weave. It starts with what's known as a kyphosis. A kyphosis is this outwards curvature. So the sacrum curls outwards. That's a kyphosis. The opposite of the kyphosis is a lordosis. The lordosis means that the vertebrae curves inwards. So as you can see, and you probably can feel on your own body when you're standing up straight, the spinal curvature goes in. It's pretty obvious here especially. Then again, we have a kyphosis. The middle spine is slightly kyphotic, meaning we're a little bit rounded. Problems show up a lot when we become overly rounded, a hyperkyphosis, too much rounding of the upper shoulders. And then at the neck area, again, we have the same as the lower back, an inward curvature, a lordosis. So altogether, we have it starting as an outward curve. It goes in, it comes out, and goes in again. Why is this so important? Because this is the way our body is engineered. This is the architecture of our spine. And when we do things throughout our lifetimes, from the ages of 10 years old to the age of maybe 30 years old, whatever we might be doing then will create a great pull on this spinal column, especially competitive sports, injuries we might get that create tight muscles or scar tissue, things that tighten up the joint spaces. Each one of these has a little space between them. All of this will change how our spinal column reacts to the force of gravity. One thing we often forget about, because we take it for granted all day long, even when we're sleeping, is that we're always working within a gravitational field. Gravity's always pulling us down a bit. So we need to use our muscles and our willpower to keep us upright, even when we're not aware of that. It may not be conscious will, it may be very subconscious, but it's always being exerted against the force of gravity.